and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I'm your host, Erik Fisher, and this is the show where I talk to the people behind the productivity. This week, I'm thrilled to share with you a conversation I had with Eyal. You may know him from his previous book, Hooked, but he's got a brand new one out, which is one of the best productivity books I have ever read. In fact, I got done with it and immediately said I need to go through this again because I'm now aware of the strategy of the book, but I need to start working on the tactics of the book. The title is Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And I know what you may be thinking. Okay, are we just going to talk about how to deal with distractions? Yes, we are. But in a new way, in a better way, in a way that I've never heard it talked about and with solutions that I've never seen before. So if you're truly ready to do the real work of dealing with distractions and become indistractable, enjoy this conversation with Eyal. Well, this week it is my privilege to welcome to the show Eyal. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Erik. It's great to be here.
I talk to people about their new books all the time, and I get lots of pitches. And so when someone writes a book that's all about just like not being distracted, I'm like, haven't we covered this enough already? And I am so glad that I am so wrong. This is the productivity book I honestly didn't know I needed, but you didn't start with this. This is your second book. Your first book really had to do with habits and, the way that products hook us, that they form addictions where we can't not have those products because they form addictions into inserting themselves in our lives. And that's essentially a good thing from a business perspective, for sure. But as a consumer, I don't know. Anyways, but that's what the book Hooked was about. What was the idea of going from Hooked over to Indistractable? Yeah.
It's interesting. So what you said in the very beginning of like, oh, do we need this? It's all been covered. And so I read all those books and I found that they didn't work for me. And because all the books basically said the same thing. All the books out there basically said, technology is a problem. Technology is melting your brain. Go on a digital detox, do a 30-day plan, meditate, and you won't get distracted anymore. And I tried all of it. I got myself a flip phone from Alibaba. I bought myself a 1990s word processor from eBay. And I said, okay, I did what the book said. No more technology, right? It's only the older type technology. I can't get constantly distracted with Facebook and Reddit and YouTube and all that stuff. Now I'm going to be super productive. And of course, that didn't happen because I'd sit down at my desk and I'd say, oh, there's that book I've been meaning to read, or let me just tidy up my desk real quick, or I probably should take out the trash. And I'd constantly find distractions because I hadn't dealt with the root cause of the problem. And so that's really why I wrote this book. I mean, I wrote this book because I'm patient zero, right? I wrote a book about distraction, not because I had the answers, but because I wanted to know the answers. So I spent the past 5 years trying out many of these productivity techniques and diving into the propaganda out there versus the truth around technology's role in all this. That in fact, even the way we talk about this stuff by calling technology addictive and saying it's hijacking your brain and, all this is really not based in science. However, it's a really good story that we love to tell ourselves that the technology is at fault. That's what's doing it to us. But in reality, this is just the latest version of a new medium that has causes distraction today. But let's be honest with each other here. If Facebook shut down tomorrow, if Zuckerberg says, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm closing down Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. I'm done. Do we really think people would stop getting distracted? Do we really think we'd start reading Shakespeare and Chaucer in our spare time? Of course not. People have always been distracted and they always will be distracted unless they know why they get distracted. And so this is why I wrote this book, because I don't think there's a knowledge gap, right? It used to be when information was scarce, you could say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to lose weight. I don't know how to be more productive at work. I don't know how to have better relationships with my family and my friends. But today it's all out there. We know what to do. Who doesn't know that a chocolate cake is not as healthy as a salad? Who doesn't know that if you want to be more productive at work, you got to do the work, even the hard stuff? Who doesn't know that to build relationships with people, you need to be fully present with them? We all know this. Why don't we do it? right? It's more than just getting things done. We also want to know, why do we fall off track? And so that's what Indistractable is really about. That's why I call it the skill of the century, because if you can master this power, if you have the ability to become indistractable, think about how your life would change. If you did everything you said you would do, that's the skill I most wanted. And so that's why, after reading all these books on the topic and none of these techniques working, I decided to research it for myself.
I would have always thought the word distractible, I would have went with undistractable, but you went with indistractable, which is probably more grammatically correct. But not only that, it has this invincibility, indistractable tone to it as well.
You nailed it. That's exactly right. So I wanted indistractable to sound like indestructible.
Yes.
And that was important to me, because this really, if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. There are only going to become more potential distractions in the world. As technology becomes more pervasive and persuasive, we are going to have an increasingly challenging time. If you are not the kind of person who understands how to control their attention and choose their life, you're going to be this other group of people who is going to have their life constantly manipulated by other forces, not just the technology we use. That's just one of many potential distractions, by what your boss wants, by what your kid wants, by what your spouse wants, by what's going on in the news. I mean, all of these things are potential distractions. And so what I argue is there's nothing evil about this stuff, right? All the other books tell you technology is melting your brain and stop using Facebook and stop checking Reddit. And I think that's rubbish. That in fact, if you think about how we think about distraction, the first place to start is to understand what the word even means. And the best way to understand what distraction is to understand what it is not. The opposite of distraction is not focus. Most people think it's focus. It's not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. Both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice both words end in the same 6-letter word, action, A-C-T-I-O-N. So traction is any action that pulls us towards what we want to do, things that we do with intent. And the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. If you plan to go on Reddit or listen to a podcast or check YouTube videos or play a video game, great, do it. That's traction if that's what you've defined you want to do with your time. Now, the opposite of traction is distraction. Anything you do that pulls you away from what you really want to do, things that you didn't plan to do with intent. And what's fascinating about distraction is that it tricks us. So, many times I would sit down at my desk and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to work on that big project I've been procrastinating on. Now I'm going to, write that chapter or do that tax thing I had to do or that presentation or whatever the thing is I've been putting off. Right after I check that email. right after I do that quick Google search, or right after I do the thing that feels worky, right? It feels like I need to do it. It's on my to-do list, but that's not the point. The point is, if you do something, even if it feels worky, I call this pseudo work, because what we tend to do are the easy or urgent tasks, and that comes at the cost of the harder tasks that are just as important, but perhaps less urgent. But if we don't get to work on them now, you know what happens. You procrastinate, and you don't do the big important stuff that really moves your life forward. So checking email, even though it feels like a work task, if you're doing it when you plan to work on that big project, is just as much of a pernicious distraction as playing a video game, because it's not what you plan to do with your time. And so my goal, I'm not going to tell anybody how to live. If you want to play video games, if you want to watch YouTube videos, I don't care. What I want you to do is to live according to your values. I want you to do whatever it is that you say is important to you. That's what I want to help you get done.
It sounds funny to say this. Not all things are bad. Technology, not bad. Like we're driven to believe that technology, like you said, is the reason we're distracted, but we were distracted before technology. I know. I was there. I was in my head. And if we're allowing distraction, it's because we want it. It's because we may say we don't want it, but it's because we allow it. We can always find another one.
Right. And we need to acknowledge that there is hardwiring that we have inherited from our evolutionary past that contributes to distraction, right? People have always been distracted. Socrates and Aristotle talked about it 2,500 years ago. They called it akrasia, the tendency for people to do things against their better interest. I mean, literally 2,500 years ago, people were saying, boy, isn't the world such a distracting place these days? So this has always been part of the human condition. And we need to take a step back to understand, why do we do this? I mean, this is such a fascinating question. If we know what to do, why don't we do it? That is such an interesting question for me. And it's much, much bigger and deeper than just the technology that distracts us. And it turns out, to answer this question of why do we do things against our better interest, we have to start with the real basic question of why do we do anything? And if you ask folks, What is the nature of human motivation? Why do we do what we do? Most people, after a little bit of thought, will come up with some answer that sounds basically like carrots and sticks, right? That everything we do is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This is called Freud's pleasure principle. Unfortunately, it's not true. That neurologically speaking, we don't do things for the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but in fact, from a neurological basis, it's pain all the way down. Everything you do is about a desire to escape discomfort, even the pursuit of pleasure. So when you want something, crave it, desire it, there's a reason we say love hurts, because neurologically speaking, that's exactly what's going on. The brain gets us to act by making us feel something. That action will stop that bad feeling. So when you feel cold, that's not comfortable, you put on a jacket. If you go back inside, now you're hot, you take it off. If you are hungry, you feel hunger pangs, you eat. And when you're stuffed, oh, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So that's physiological sensations. This is called the homeostatic response. The same truth is constant when it comes to psychological sensations. So if you're lonely, check Facebook. If you're uncertain, you Google. If you're bored, you check Reddit, stock prices, ESPN, lots of things cure this uncomfortable sensation of boredom. So if we can agree that all human behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, listen carefully, that means that time management is pain management. And so that's why I was so excited to be on your show, because this is how we move beyond the to-do list. Because you can use every life hack and every technique in the world about how to be more productive. But if you don't understand this truth that time management is pain management, you are never going to be able to control your attention and choose your life. We have to start by learning tactics to cope with discomfort in order to do what it is we say we're going to do.
In the book, you talk all about where are these different pains coming from internally as well as externally.
Right.
And so I'd love to talk about some of this, so let's start with internal. I knew this to be true when I started reading the book, but it was a new awareness for me about recognizing that distraction starts from within.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's the most important first step. That when we realize that all our behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort, whether it's traction or distraction, we can utilize those uncomfortable sensations for good. One of the beefs I have with the self-help and personal productivity industry these days is that the industry preaches to people that if you're not happy all the time, if you're not, satisfied, then something's wrong with you. And nothing could be further from the truth. That we have to realize that our species has inherited this perpetual disquietude. We are designed for dissatisfaction. Think about it from an evolutionary basis. If there was ever a group of Homo sapiens who were satisfied and happy with life, our ancestors probably killed and ate them. Okay? Because satisfaction is not evolutionarily beneficial. And so what makes us strive for better, stronger, faster, what helps us create life-saving medicine to reach for the stars is dissatisfaction. Now, if we let it get the best of us, it can lead towards distraction. But if we can harness it, if we can utilize it, then it can be our greatest strength because it can move us towards traction. And so what we have to do is to become more aware of these uncomfortable emotional states and use these tactics that I describe in the book to move us towards traction by coping with the discomfort in a healthier manner or fixing the source of the problem. So that's our only two choices. And when we take those two paths, there's techniques we can follow. But that's really, in summary, our fork in the road. When it comes to these internal triggers, if we realize that time management is pain management, we have to figure out what's the source of the discomfort. Is it something I can fix in my life? Is it a toxic workplace culture? Is it a failing marriage? Is it financial troubles? If that's the source of the problem, well, that has to be fixed first. But the fact is, you're never going to take away all your pain and discomfort. That's part of being a human being. And so the only other strategy we can use is how do we cope with that discomfort in a healthier manner? And there are three ways we can do that. We can reimagine the trigger, we can reimagine the task, and we can reimagine our temperament. But I don't want to talk too long. I'll let you steer here.
Yeah. It's clear to me. I mean, again, this was the new piece to me that suddenly clicked in my brain, was that the understanding of the pain equals the understanding of our internal triggers, because again, basically knowing what the distractions are distracting you from is the key to understanding how to keep from being distracted.
Right. That's exactly right.
And that was never something that I ever dealt with.
Yeah. And most of us don't learn that. And in fact, what most people do is they fall into one of two camps. I call them the blamers or the shamers. The blamers say, it's the technology that did it to me. You see, it's hijacking my brain. These products, they're built to be engaging. Well, duh. Do we want Netflix? Hey, Netflix, can you please make boring shows that I don't want to watch? Hey, Facebook, make your product something that I don't want to use. Or Apple, can you make crappy devices that are not user friendly? That'd be great. Okay. No, that doesn't make any sense. This isn't a problem. This is progress. Of course, we want products to be easy to use, user-friendly, fun to use. They're designed to be engaging. So we can't blame technology for being something we want to use. That's why they are built that way. And I know this from being an industry insider. I know all the psychological tricks that they use. And I can tell you from my first book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, these techniques are good. They're not that good. They're not mind control. They're not addicting all of us. Some people, little asterisks here, some people do get addicted. Just like some people get addicted to alcohol. We're not all alcoholics. Some people do become addicted, but the vast majority of us, this isn't an addiction. This is a distraction. Now, the other group of people who are not the blamers, we call them the shamers. The shamers, and this is the category I used to be in. The shamers, when they go off track, they tell themselves, oh, you see, I'm so lazy. Why can't I get these things done? What's wrong with me? I must have an addictive personality. I must have a short attention span. And we beat ourselves up in this way that ironically, get this, sends us down this vicious loop of shame. And we know that shame leads to more of the internal triggers, more of the bad feelings that we seek to escape. Guess with what? More distraction. And so this is the ridiculous cycle of procrastination I used to fall into of, having to do something, feeling an uncomfortable sensation, boredom, uncertainty, fatigue, stress, whatever it is, not doing it for a little while, like using a distraction to not do it, telling myself I'm a lazy screw up, and then that feels bad. So I do more of the distraction. And so the way you break this vicious cycle is to realize what's going on and that we shouldn't be blamers or shamers, that neither of those solutions are the right path, that these are behaviors. And guess what? Behaviors can change if we know how to change them.
So how do we go about starting to change? You said reimagining the internal trigger and then reimagining the task and reimagining your temperament.
Right. Yeah. So those are the three big pillars of how so if we can't fix the source of the problem, right? I'm not one of these. I love meditation. Meditation is wonderful, but I think some people go off the deep end with meditation. So I'm not criticizing meditation, but what some people say in terms of meditation is basically that, that's the only solution. I don't agree with that. I think if you can fix the problem, you definitely should. Okay. So put that in one category of it's not good enough just to learn to cope. You also need to change the problems in your life that are causing you discomfort. If you can't, right? If you still have these negative sensations, which you definitely will, we all feel boredom and stress, fatigue, uncertainty, loneliness. We all feel that stuff. What you want to do is to start by reimagining the trigger. And you want to look at that trigger in a new way. Instead of dealing with that trigger with contempt, this is what most people do, certainly what I used to do, of beating yourself up, of telling yourself that somehow you're deficient, you want to explore that trigger with curiosity. And psychologists tell us that simply noting that sensation is the first step to gaining agency and control over it, that just writing it down empowers you. So there I go. I'm reaching for my cell phone because this task is boring. Okay. I'm going to write down on a piece of paper. I give people a distraction tracker at the back of my book where they can do this in the book itself, or they can print one out at Indistractable.com. And by simply writing down that sensation, that's the first step. Then what you want to do, and there's many, many techniques I describe. One of my favorites is called the 10-minute rule. And you tell yourself you can give in to distraction, any distraction you want, in 10 minutes. Because it turns out that strict abstinence can actually backfire. This is called the white bear effect.
Yes.
So if I tell you don't think of a white bear, what are you going to think about? Nothing but a white bear.
I already have it in my head.
There you go. Right. And so this is why abstinence it can actually backfire. And we see this with smokers. There's a lot of research that shows that, okay, nicotine is addictive, but it turns out that what's really even more addictive is this cycle of rumination that people go through when they tell themselves, don't smoke, don't smoke. Don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke. Okay, fine, I'll smoke. I can't resist it anymore. And it's kind of like when you pull a rubber band really tight and then you let go. The rubber band doesn't start from where you start to pull it. No. It ricochets out and, it goes way far beyond. So when we tell ourselves, don't, okay, fine. that relief of discomfort, again, all human behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort. So the relief of discomfort of telling yourself don't actually feels good. And the brain begins to associate the way I feel good is by giving in. And so we don't want to go down that path. We don't want strict abstinence when it comes to distraction, because when we give in, what we're reinforcing that cycle. So here's what we want to do instead. I will tell my phone, I'll say, set a timer for 10 minutes when I feel myself about to get distracted. And I say, okay, I can give into that distraction. I can check email. I can go on Reddit. I can do whatever the thing that I want to do. I eat that piece of chocolate cake in 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, I have two choices. I can either get back to the task at hand, or I have to feel that sensation with curiosity rather than contempt. And you would be amazed how in just 10 minutes of doing what psychologists call surfing the urge, just feel that sensation for 10 minutes. You don't even have to do it with your eyes closed so you don't look weird when you're in the office. You can just sit there and just be with that sensation. For most people, 9 times out of 10, you won't get to that 10 minutes. After minute 2, 3, 4, you say, okay, I'm good. I get it. I was bored. This was difficult. Now let's get back to the task at hand. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a dozen other techniques that I could share, but we don't have time for all of them. That's a big one when it comes to mastering these internal triggers.
That one is huge. And I've heard it done similar to that on a past guest at some point, where as he is working on something, he has a pad and a paper that's just out of reach. And if a thought does bubble up that is distracting, and it's like, ooh, you know what? You should go Google this. You should go, hey, remember that you have to pay this bill. Oh, you've got that meeting later today and you got to remember to prep for it. And as those things would bubble up, much like with meditation, he would allow the thought to be present, and then he would actually reach for the pad, take the pen, not digitally writing this, and he would write that thing down and then move it away again. And it was as if it had been dealt with, or at least your mind was satisfied that you captured the thought and then let it go again. And this is a little bit, it's not the same thing, but it's a somewhat similar, this is what it reminded me of.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a very effective way to deal with that potential distraction. It's amazing how, and this is a little bit like David Allen preaches in terms of, get it out of your head so it's not constantly ruminating, and put it on paper. That's how you begin to gain agency over it. Of course, in getting things done, it's about the task. I argue that you can also use the same technique for the feeling, for the sensation that you're trying to not give into when it comes to distraction. Because again, we can use those uncomfortable emotional states for good. So instead of telling yourself, what people who get distracted, the way I used to operate was, as soon as I would feel something I didn't want to feel, boom, I would jump into whatever that thing that would relieve the discomfort that I didn't want to face. So I would, click onto some other website or some other task or whatever to take me out of the pain I was in psychologically. But of course we can use that for good by changing the narrative, by talking to ourselves in a different way. So instead of saying, oh, you see, I'm so lazy, here I go again, getting distracted. Instead, what we can say is, okay, this task is difficult. Well, difficulty is part of the process of getting better. And that can drive us to be better at that task. Okay, this is normal. This is what I'm supposed to be feeling when I'm stretching myself, when I'm pushing myself beyond my capabilities.
I have now, for the last let's say 2 months plus, that's true, closed all the rings on my Apple Watch, my activity. I've worked out, stood and burned calories, etc., every day for almost 2.5 months now. And it started off just being an initial thing that I was doing. But then I realized, I want to start coupling that with some other changes. And one of the ones that I came up with it was definitely a distraction thing. And it had to do with eating snacks late at night when it was not a necessary thing to do. Really should have just stayed away. I wasn't hungry, but I wanted to be, basically it was bored, or I was having, negative thoughts, feelings, whatever. I was eating my feelings, and,
totally.
We've all been there. And, and I'm not going to say like, oh, I'm quote cured or not distracted or anything like that at this point. But what did the trick for me was that I started using this app. It's a fasting app. And what I did was, I think it's called Zero, actually. And what I did was I said, well, wait a second. Breakfast is called breakfast for a reason. You're breaking a fast. Mm-hmm. And even if you only do a 12-hour fast, that's normal. If you go from 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock or 7 to 7 or something like that, that's only about an hour to 2 hours of window where I would normally be eating. Like in other words, I'm already fasting through the night, right? We all are, unless we're getting up in the middle of the night and eating whatever. But if we're waking up and we're eating in the morning and then we work our way backwards, 12 hours is around that 8 o'clock time. And that's about the time I wasn't wanting to eat anymore from that point forward. And so I would turn it on. And so then instead of this is the rubber band thing. Don't pull it. And then you do, or you release it, whatever. I'm forgetting what the term was.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So that this is exactly why we form addictions to all kinds of weird things. If you actually sit and smell a cigarette, even if you're a smoker, they've done these experiments where they ask smokers to just be thoughtful about the experience of smoking. And it turns out that most smokers, when they actually sit and inhale the scent of the tobacco burning, they're like, this is gross. This smells awful. It does smell awful.
Yeah.
They've just formed a positive association with the behavior. And so now not doing it really, really hurts. And the only way to stop that discomfort is to give into it. And so recognizing this, they did a fascinating experiment where they put flight attendants who smoked on 2 flights from Tel Aviv. And one group of flight attendants went from Tel Aviv to London. The other group of flight attendants went from Tel Aviv to New York. One was a 3-hour flight. One was a 9-hour flight, I believe, 8 or 9 hour flight. And they asked these flight attendants to rate their level of cravings for a cigarette every 30 minutes. And you would think if the notion that addiction to cigarettes is caused by nicotine being processed in the brain, being metabolized in the brain, then they should both experience equal amount of craving after a certain number of hours elapsed. But that's not what happened. What happened is that when the flight attendants who went to London were 30 minutes from landing, they experienced the highest feelings of craving. Meanwhile, the flight attendants who were over the Atlantic Ocean on their way to New York experienced very little craving at the same exact minute in time. When the flight attendants who were landing in New York experienced the highest level of craving was also 30 minutes before they could light up. So again, it was that craving, that desire to do something that you're telling yourself, don't do, fine. That's what causes this this positive association, I should say, with the behavior and the relief of the discomfort of the behavior. And this is why, the drug war in America has largely failed, because we constantly blame the substance, right? We always say, well, drugs cause drug addiction, right? Isn't that pretty clear? Well, no, it's way more complicated than that. Addiction is a confluence of factors. And so it's never just about the product. There's always more to it. Nobody steps on a heroin needle and becomes addicted to heroin. That's just not how it works. There's trauma. There's comorbidity with conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder. There's always something going on. And so in our own lives as well, very few of us are actually addicted, and we should stop calling ourselves as such. But the same underlying mechanic of associating a behavior with its ability to stop discomfort is this truism that we should learn and utilize in our lives. But just to reframe all this in context, this is just step one.
Yes.
I don't want listeners to think that the entire book is just about this. That's just step one. Step two is about making time for traction. It's about this fact that we can't call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. Many people, it turns out 2/3 of Americans don't keep a calendar. That's crazy. How can you say that something is a distraction if you didn't plan to do anything with that time? So we have to keep what's called a time box calendar. And I tell you how to do that, how to synchronize that with your stakeholders in your life, like your family, your colleagues. And then the third step is to hack back the external triggers, all the pings, dings, rings that pull us off track, not only on our phones, not only on our computers, but in many different aspects of our life. How do you hack back an open floor plan office, right? What if you work in an office where people walk by your desk every day? That's super distracting. How do you hack back meetings? How do you hack back email? And then the final step is to prevent distraction with pacts. And this is all about what's called a pre-commitment device that we can use to change our behavior for the long term.
I love it. And then you even, though you didn't just mention it, talk about raising our kids to be able to learn this skill or grow up with this skill.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's switch over to external triggers. This is where the technology gets the bad rap and the blame, because we say, well, it's the unwanted external triggers and it's the cues in our environment, and the phone, smartphone, is like taking that environment with us everywhere in our pocket if it's set up as a slot machine.
Yeah. And look, that is true. That's what my book Hooked is all about. The reason I wrote Hooked wasn't for the benefit of the gaming companies or the social media companies. They've known these techniques for a very, very long time. And I argue we want them to make their products engaging, right? I mean, would we want it any other way? And so all sorts of products that are engaging use consumer psychology. They use variable rewards, intermittent reinforcement, social rewards. I mean, that's part of what makes these things interesting. Now, I think there's a leap in people say, well, that's mind control. Let me tell you, I've been on the inside. I've tried every one of these techniques. It's not mind control. Right? It's not mind control unless you say it is. That's the thing. There are studies. One of the chapters in the book is called Reimagining Your Temperament. And temperament is all about these traits of a person or an animal, right? That's what temperament means. And it turns out that we all carry around with us these beliefs about who we are and what we do. And it turns out many of us, myself included, again, I'm patient zero here, had many of these self-limiting beliefs. One of the most pernicious in this piece of folk psychology that many people believe is this idea that willpower is a limited resource.
Oh, I love this. I need to pause you and say this has been something that has been said on this show before by multiple people. And I was so glad to hear you say that this is like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour rule not being a real thing, kind of a revision. So
yes,
ego depletion is what it is, right?
That's right. It's funny. I just met with David Epstein, the guy who wrote Range. Fantastic book for those of you who want the debunking of Malcolm Gladwell. It's not actually the debunking. It's the recategorization, because
yes,
he does say that. Anyway, that's a whole nother show.
Malcolm wasn't wrong. He just left some stuff out. That's all.
That's right.
We'll leave it at that.
So, and it turns out the same is true when it comes to this concept of ego depletion. We've all heard it, right? That you run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And this used to happen to me every day. I didn't know it was called ego depletion at the time, but I'd come home from work and I was feeling spent. Note that word, spent, right? Like gas in a gas tank, none left. And so I deserved to sit on the couch and watch Netflix and eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's because I'm spent. No more willpower, And there were actually studies a few years ago that showed that this effect was real, except for the fact that other psychologists couldn't replicate the results. That when other psychologists said, this looks a little too good to be true, this, I'm going to do this study again. And if you've been following the social psychology landscape, there's been a lot of problems now with replicating the results from many studies. And this is one of the studies that kind of came under the gun. And it turned out that ego depletion does not exist. It is not a real thing. You do not run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank, except certain people. There is one group of people, and this research was done by Carol Dweck at Stanford. You might have read her book about mindset. Fantastic work. And she did this study where she found that willpower is a depletable resource, that ego depletion does really exist for one group of people. And that group of people are people who believe in ego depletion.
I love it.
Right.
Oh.
And this is so important because this is exactly what's going on with this current debate around technology addicting you and hijacking your brain. Well, if you tell yourself that that's true, it is true because you learn helplessness. You don't even try to change it. And so that's what I'm on this crusade to fix. I want to empower people to understand that there is so much more you can do about distraction than you may even know.
This dovetailed right into what I was talking about with the not eating at night thing. And what I realized was happening after the fact. Like I wasn't wandering into the kitchen. I wasn't thinking about it at all. And again, it's that late at night thing. Like my willpower was, quote, depleted for the day. I was going to have the least amount of control then. And I just flipped the script and made it a positive thing that once or twice, like it came up and I was like, oh, I feel a little hungry. And I was like, yeah, but I'm fasting is what I would say to myself in my head. And suddenly that was a positive thing, not a negative thing. And I wasn't depriving myself. And then I noticed like I actually, like, we'd had ice cream in the refrigerator for 2+ weeks, haven't touched it once.
Nice.
In the evening. Like, well,
so
at all in the day.
Fascinating about that. You've used a technique, and you read this in the book as well. The fourth tactics. Remember, we talked about mastering internal triggers, making time for traction, hacking back the external triggers. The fourth technique is about making a pre-commitment, preventing distraction with pacts. And so what you've done by saying, no, I'm fasting right now, you are entering into a contract with yourself, and we can use these pre-commitments to help us stay on track. It's a wonderful technique. It's an ancient technique. Ulysses in the Odyssey does this in this story that's 2,500 years old. And so it's a very effective technique. The one warning I will say is that, what I discovered is if you do that technique first, if you make a pact with yourself, where there's some kind of punishment or effort or some kind of contract you make with yourself, it's a very effective technique. In fact, it's been known to be the most effective smoking cessation technique ever studied. However, it can backfire. It can backfire if you don't do the other things first. For example, if you don't remove the external triggers, if you have ice cream staring at you right in your face, it's really hard to not eat it, right? You have to do the other things first, particularly when it comes to those negative internal triggers, right? Eventually, if in this process, like, it's great that you're doing it with the fasting, it's fantastic, but you also are doing it in conjunction with other techniques. You have a way to cool down when you're tempted to eat ice cream when you didn't want to, right? You're dealing with those internal triggers in other ways, so you have to do those first. And so that's just a disclaimer I want to make sure everybody's aware of, that don't jump straight into those.
And again, this is one of those things where those external triggers, hacking those, this is one of we've all heard this before. We've heard the whole, all right, if you're going to avoid eating all this junk food, you're going to just literally need to open up a giant garbage bag and go through and just start chucking it all and removing it. And that's the throwing the baby out with the bathwater thing, that we, again, are blaming technology for all distractions.
Yeah. So here's the thing. One of the mottos in the book that I'm most proud of, because I have a marketing background, so I don't know how to say this, politely, but I'm proud of this particular motto, so I'll just say it that way, is the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. So if the chocolate cake or the ice cream is on its way to your mouth on the spoon, too late. That's not the time to seek willpower, right? Like, you have to plan ahead. Okay. So we do have to take steps to make sure that we don't get distracted when the time comes. And it doesn't matter what algorithm Facebook has or how persuasive technology is. Fundamentally, we can take these steps in conjunction. You have to use these techniques together to make sure that we don't do something we'll later regret.
Let's talk about some of the most obvious ways that we can do some of this hacking back with these external triggers.
Yeah. So external triggers, this is probably the easiest of the 4 steps. This is almost, I don't want to call it kindergarten, but it kind of is. even though people think that the technology is the problem, it's the easiest to take care of. So, in the chapter, so there's 8 different environments that I help people hack back. So one of them is your phone, your computer, meetings, group chat, open floor plan office. I walk through all of these steps. Some of the easiest things you can do. It turns out, 2/3 of people with a smartphone in the United States of America, 2/3 never change their notification settings. Like, really? I couldn't believe that stat. We're calling technology addictive when you haven't taken 10 minutes to turn off all those notifications that distract you when you're with your kids or when you're in a business meeting. Come on, that's not hard stuff. So I don't like to dwell too much on that because I put it in the book. It takes up 2 pages.
Yes.
But for folks who maybe don't do this, apparently there's 2/3 of Americans who don't do it. Come on, that's got to be the first step, right? There's no reason that you're going to let these apps ping and ding you all day long when you're doing something else. So what we want to do is we want to remove the ones that don't serve us from our phone. We want to rearrange our phone so that we're not constantly staring at all these distracting apps, right? So our home screen is sacred space. We should remove those external triggers from that space. There's lots of tips and tricks on how to do all this stuff. Some of them I'm sure you will have heard 1 or 2. A lot of them will be new to you. But I think what's less obvious to folks is how our environment can be such a source of distraction. So one of the things I put in the book is this screen sign. And this screen sign is something that I found, a lot of folks throughout their day, when you track how many times a day they become distracted, many people, particularly people who work in open floor plan environments, get distracted just by their colleagues. And so there's this screen sign in the book that you tear out It's made out of cardstock. So it's more rigid paper. You tear it out of the book, you fold it into thirds, and you put it on your computer monitor. And it tells your colleagues, I'm indistractable at the moment. Please come back later. And that's a great way not only to signal to your colleagues that you're doing focused work, but also initiates this culture in the office that begins to change how people think about bothering each other all day long. And you say, oh, well, I'll use headphones. Isn't that, when I use headphones, people know to leave me alone. That might be true, but it comes with the baggage that people think you're watching YouTube videos. So people don't know what you're doing with those headphones. So it's much better to put this screen sign that tells people I'm indistractable at the moment. Please come back later.
I've tried to use that before. And even, here working in my home office, they can clearly see I have the headphones on. I am doing something, but it's a matter of if I'm interacting with somebody or interacting with something that I need to focus on. They don't know. They don't take it that seriously.
Interesting. So you work from home. Do you? I don't know if you have kids. Do you have kids?
I do.
Okay, so this is a problem with kids. I also work from home, and the screen sign didn't work because my little girl was not perceptive enough to see my computer monitor that had the screen sign. So what do? My wife went on Amazon, and there's a picture of her in the book wearing this. She went on Amazon and she found this $5 wreath crown. Okay, it's ridiculous, and it's ridiculous by design. You would not use this in an office. You would only use this at home, where it's to prevent your kids or your spouse from distracting you. And it has a battery in it that lights up, with bright colors when she turns it on. And we call this the concentration crown. And you can't miss it. I mean, it's a light up crown on her head. And whenever my daughter, we started using this about 2 years ago. So she was 9 years old at the time. Whenever she sees that, it stops her in her tracks and she knows, okay, mommy can't be distracted. And I have to admit, for me as well, I don't miss it either. And I distract her a lot less because people can be external triggers as well. If an external trigger is prompting you to do something you didn't want to do, whether it's a ping or ding on your phone or a person, if it's prompting you to do something you don't want to do, it is a distraction.
Other than like the obvious visual cue for people outside of yourselves, because people can be external triggers. What else, like quick win wise, can we stick in here?
Sure. For which one? The mastering internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, or prevent distraction with packs?
That's a great question. I mean, we've covered it all in varying degrees.
We've covered. I want folks to realize those are the 4 strategies.
Yes.
Okay. Tactics are what you do. Strategies are why you do it. Mm-hmm. So the book is heavy on tactics and strategy, but the tactics will change. You're going to customize and come up with your own tactics. I've already, the book's only been out a few days now, and I'm already getting people say, oh, I adopted your strategy, and here's a little bit of a different tactic I'm using. That's fantastic. The most important part isn't the tactics. The most important part is the strategy, that now you can look at this picture. There's a visual model of these 4 steps: traction, distraction, internal, external triggers. And now you can, for the first time, say, now I know why I get distracted and I can do something about it. There's that quote that insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. This is what my life was like. Every day, half my to-do list got recycled to the next day and the next day and the next day because I kept getting distracted by doing other stuff. Well, now I can look at that and say, now I know why I got distracted, and I don't keep getting distracted by the same stupid thing every day.
Yes. And actually, I think this is actually a really good place to stop after this thought, which is this. I said this in pre-recording, that there are a handful of productivity books that when people ask me for what's the best one they should start with, and I kind of ask more questions about, what are you dealing with? Where are you at? This book has moved into that very small group. And here's why. Because when I was done with examining the strategy, I had the exact same reaction. And I told you this was, I went through the book now. I need to go back through the book again and work on not the strategy, but the tactics that are personal for me.
Yeah. And that's why, make sure if you do get the book, you can go to, for those listening, I know you already have it, but for those listening, you can go to Indistractable.com, and there's a complimentary 80-page workbook. I couldn't put it in the book because, I'll be honest with you, the book was already 250 pages. And to add another 80 pages for a book about distraction, my wife was like, nobody's going to read a book that long about distraction. so there's actually a totally free workbook at Indistractable.com. that helps you down this path where you can actually, introspect on some of these techniques and apply them in your own life as well.
Yes, I grabbed that as well, and so I'll link up to that in the show notes if people, are a bit too busy as they're being distracted from listening to this podcast or don't want to be distracted from listening to the podcast and finish it out by going over to a browser to grab it. But you can find it there later. And this is awesome. I mean, I seriously think this book will be, again, me coming up with my own personal tactics as well as anybody listening that does the same. They grasp the strategy, they come up with their tactics and become I almost said indestructible, but that's the point, right?
That's the point.
Indistractable. Great job. I don't
Thank you so much.
I never say that, actually. I never say great job to anybody about their book, but I want to say great job. This is really going to be a line in the sand for me.
I really appreciate it. That means so much to me. I spent 5 years on it, and I really want to make sure that the advice was not only useful and practical, but also research backed. So everything in the book is backed by peer-reviewed studies, and it works. Fundamentally, it works.
Well, again, Indistractable is the name of the book. It's been great talking with you, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Erik.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your podcast listening to-do list. I hope that you weren't distracted as you listened to it. And like I said, this really is the no-brainer productivity book that you need to be grabbing right now. This is the next thing, in my mind, for me personally to tackle. We come at this problem thinking it's a matter of lack of focus, but really it's a lack of growing the skill of dealing with distractions in the proper way. And this is one of the best productivity books I have ever read. I grabbed the workbook. I am going to go through the workbook with the book. To grab the workbook for free, all you need to do is go over to Indistractable.com. There you can even order the book, but I highly suggest you go grab this one right away because this is the next place to go in terms of productivity. If you enjoyed this conversation, which I hope you did, I would love it if you would share it with somebody else you know needs to hear this message. Hit the share button in whatever your podcast player is that you're using to listen to this right now, and or direct them over to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com/290. Thanks for sharing this episode. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next episode.